So I think the first thing to realize is let's not assume that just because we're over 35, it's going to be a difficult journey. Second, I think it's really important to unhook the age from what's actually happening in your body.
This is the Entrepology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Entrepology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As a naturopathic doctor and anthropologist, I optimize the health and performance of badass women working to change the world as entrepreneurs and go-getters. You know, people exactly like you. Your business, body balance, and inner badass, these are the themes we are exploring. So it is a pleasure today to introduce you to a renowned colleague, Dr. Aumatma Simmons. Dr. Aumatma is a passionate feminist and advocate for women's health. And in particular, what she wants to discuss is dispelling the myths about what fertility means for women over the age of 35. As a busy entrepreneur and someone on a mission with their life, this is an area of subject and questioning that so many people and so many women in particular need to look at. It is truly a pleasure for me to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Dr. Aumatma Simmons. Dr. Aumatma Simmons, welcome to the Entrepology Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Megan. So excited.
I'm really, really delighted to have you. And we are going to explore a really important topic today. And that is this idea of holistic fertility and the critical information that women need to know about their fertility as they are engaging in busy states of lives and getting a little bit older. And this is an incredibly important body of work. It's something that's deeply personal to you. And I would love for you, before we jump into it, to share with my listeners what brought you to this point in your career. Why was this the vertical that you chose to go into?
What a great question. So I started on the path of naturopathic medicine, just feeling really excited that I was in a profession that integrates mind, body, and spirit. That is so much of what brought me into naturopathic medicine. And for years after graduating, I just was doing primary care. I mostly treated women. I kind of did the whole gamut of everything that women come in with. And then I was married to this person that I didn't realize till after we got married that it was the wrong person for me to be with. So I was getting to that age of 35, and I feel like when I was in medical school, I learned what Western medical students learn, which is at 35, your fertility kind of drops off a cliff. So I was coming upon that age. I had spent almost 10 years trying to find this person that I wanted to spend my life with, and realizing or waking up to the fact that this may not be the right person. And it's definitely not going to be my future child's father. So I started just diving into the research around fertility, mostly from the perspective of what can I do for myself to preserve my fertility till later? Because if I was going to leave this person, I was going to need more time than the 35 age limit to be able to have a child. And I had kind of like madly started researching all of this. And simultaneously, while in a business coaching program, every time this person would say, find your niche, fertility would literally pop into my head. And I was like, no, I can't. That's not my path. And I resisted it until I ended up at a acupuncture clinic. One of my friends needed help at this clinic. And he was like, hey, can you come fill in for the naturopathic doctor that just quit? And I was like, okay, sure. Why not? So I go and help him out. And the head acupuncturist is a fertility specialist. Surprise, surprise. And she had heard me on some podcasts talking about the research that I was finding. And she says, hey, you're really good with fertility. Help all these people that I haven't been able to help. And there was literally like hundreds of people that had been trying to get pregnant for 3, 4, 5 years. They had been doing all the acupuncture and Western medicine approaches. They were not being successful. And I started working with them. And sure enough, they started getting pregnant really quickly, like 3, 4, 5 months. And that's when I was like, oh, this might be what I need to do with my life. This is actually like one of the most rewarding things that I was doing at the time. And to be able to like support someone who is on this journey, struggling, it's like such a deep pain that so many of these women experience. So just to be able to like to be part of that transformation to the point where they're entering motherhood, it was just so rewarding. I was like, okay, I don't know why I was resisting this, but this is definitely what I need to do with my life.
The path picked you.
Yeah, it kind of did.
Can you take us through the landscape of fertility? I mean, we hear these pretty staggering statistics in terms of the number of couples that are experiencing challenges with respect to fertility. And frankly, I'm sure you see this in your office as well. Most of the women I worked with who were like, okay, well, we're thinking of starting a family, their immediate assumption is this is going to be a problem for us. And so I would love for you to give us that evidence-based perspective on what the landscape of fertility challenge is really look like for women right now, especially women over the age of 30 and 35.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I would share about the landscape is that the assumption is that our fertility declines at 35. Most of that research comes out of France in the 1800s. The more current research that's available to us actually shows that there's only a 3% decline in fertility between the age of 29 and 39. So they've tested groups of women side by side, and there was only a 3% difference between the two age groups. So I think the first thing to realize is let's not assume that just because we're over 35, it's going to be a difficult journey. Second, I think it's really important to unhook the age from what's actually happening in your body, right? So I feel like the class of women that I've worked with, so many of them have assumed that they were just going to get off their birth control and voila, they were going to be pregnant, right. So like that perspective of, I don't need to do anything. We're so infrequently educated about our bodies and what's actually happening that we just assume that as soon as we're off of birth control, this is going to happen. And that's not the reality. The reality is only the percentage of success, quote unquote, or ability to get pregnant in any given cycle is only 20%. So on average, 1 out of 5 cycles is possibly going to lead to pregnancy. And
I was going to say, unless you're in high school, in which you should assume that it's 100% every month.
Right. That's true. Which is kind of that's the only time that we're educated about our bodies and fertility. And the message is really like, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. And, yes, I feel like we should kind of prevent, high school pregnancies if that's not a like conscious choice that women are making.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think it's important to realize that like it's only like this maybe 7-day window in our month where we could even possibly get pregnant. And I kind of wish I knew that growing up, as someone of Indian descent, my parents took it to the extreme and they were like, if you even talk to a guy, you're going to get pregnant. And, on some level, I knew that wasn't true. But that was their like fear tactic to like keep me away from all of it, you know? And yeah. And I feel like a lot of the women that I grew up with really kind of had similar perspectives because their parents were doing the same thing. So it's kind of like we lose the opportunity for young women to be able to connect with their bodies and learn so much more about what's happening on a day-to-day basis throughout our cycle when we just tell them, you're going to just get pregnant if you have sex. I think obviously protected sex, right? Like do not have sex without protection, but let's also make sure that you know the connection with your body and like feel out when you're ovulating and all of those things, which is just not taught in our educational system.
100%. You know, I've had women in my practice, highly educated women, and they're like, I have no idea when we are supposed to have sex to get pregnant. Like, do we do it while I'm on my period? Do we do? And the first few times I had questions, like I heard questions like this, I was like, oh gosh, like really? And then I realized I'm like, oh gosh, really? Like we did such a poor job as society about having these intimate conversations with women that like really huge numbers of women actually don't know, and they don't know a safe place to turn to seek that information. And then you get glamour magazine articles that are just like, oh, you're screwed if you're trying to have a child over the age of 29. So I like this idea of setting the record straight, because we as naturopathic doctors understand that the age piece is so much less relevant as a data point as the lifestyle choices and what's actually happening physiologically in your body. Because we do have an issue with infertility globally. So let's talk about some of the factors that actually do inform greater challenges with respect to one's fertility.
Yeah, I think on a very basic level, it's if you are on birth control or were put on birth control when you were younger for difficult cycles, whether that be extreme menstrual pain, irregular cycles, heavy bleeding, just a whole host of like quote unquote abnormalities that made for a more challenging cycle. If you were put on birth control for those things, we missed the boat in the sense that there is probably something going on with your hormones that needs to be addressed and needs to be rebalanced before you're going to be able to conceive easily. And
half of our audience is like, shit. Because that's what happened to them. They're like, oh, my doctor's put me on the birth control pill and said, we'll manage your fertility in 20 years when you're ready.
Yeah. And, you know, I just like responded to a question on some chat board that I'm part of, that someone was posting, should I bring my daughter at the age of 17 who's having really irregular cycles with heavy bleeding? Should I bring her to a naturopathic physician? And my response is absolutely. Please do not put her on birth control. Take her to a naturopathic doctor, because that is like one of the key things. I would say like 50% of young women are just put on birth control because of issues with their cycles that are that birth control is going to suppress any evidence that there's an issue with the hormones, right? So it kind of like puts a Band-Aid on it or a mask on it so that you don't have to deal with that until you're ready to until you're ready to get pregnant. And then by the time you're ready to get pregnant, it's usually like, hey, I want to get off my birth control and be pregnant next month. And that's just not a reasonable expectation. Like your body's not going to swing to normal after 10, 15, 20 years of being on birth control for issues that really should have been dealt with when you were younger. So I think it's really important to realize that any of those issues are really good indicators that you probably want to, at the minimum, give yourself a year, possibly 2 years, to prepare your body to get pregnant before you're ready to get pregnant.
So that is going to be a mic drop moment. And so many people literally have now dropped their phones. They're like, I'm sorry, did you say 2 years? Like maybe a year? Because the reality is, I'll speak from my personal experience. When you decide that you want to get pregnant, you want to get pregnant. That second, like it is yesterday I wanted to be pregnant. That was the decision I just made. And this is, I think, the most critical and empowering conversation of all, is that it's not a matter of, and it's not an empowered place either. I'm just going to stay on my birth control pill, come off, and then I get pregnant. This is all my choices. Because I think there's a lot of assumptions thrown into that piece. How do you assess someone's health in terms of where they are at with respect to optimized fertility?
Yeah, so that's a really important topic, because the second point that I would make is that infertility is one of the only diagnoses that we make after you have had a struggle for a really long period of time. So infertility, quote unquote, the diagnosis is essentially 6 months of trying and not conceiving if you're over the age of 35, or 12 months of trying and not conceiving under the age of 35. So we basically make women wait 6 to 12 months before even testing their hormones. And to me, this list literally blows my mind. Is like, if you were having chest pain, no doctor is going to make you wait 6 to 12 months to get a diagnosis of, oh, you have angina, right? Like, nobody's going to do that. You have chest pain, you go to the doctor says, great, let's do some tests and figure out what's going on. With women, this is something that we have, I don't get it. It really pisses me off that we make women wait 6 to 12 months. So my perspective is, let's shift that on its head. Like, hormones should be something, assuming you're not on birth control, hormones should be something that you're testing every single year, just like you would go to your OBGYN for a checkup, right? Like, you should be doing this on a yearly basis. The hormones that you really want tested on day 2 or 3 of your cycle are FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, LH, which is luteinizing hormone, AMH, which is anti-Müllerian hormone, and estradiol, which is one of the estrogens in the body. So those are the 4 kind of crucial, essential tests to determine, or to at least get a sense of what's happening in the body that may point towards fertility issues. That's not at all the full scope, but I think that's a really good starting point.
And when someone sees permutations in their normal trend related to these numbers, assuming they can get their doctor to even run them, but this is something anyone's naturopathic doctor could access for them. If one were to see permutations in these numbers, how do you start to approach it? What does your methodology in working with these women look like? Because you've had such tremendous success.
Yeah. So our process is, one, to really understand what those hormones mean, right? So I think and I've seen some other doctors do this, where they kind of go by the quote unquote within normal limits of the lab, right? And a lot of these hormones within normal limits means nothing. Like, I think the estrogen within normal limits is way over 100. If you have really high levels of estrogen, it's creating a few different issues with the quality of your eggs that is going to maybe not necessarily always show up as infertility. It can also create, the difficulty to stay pregnant. So you might have a miscarriage or multiple miscarriages. So making sure that you're really assessing this from a more like functional medicine perspective where you're looking for optimal, not normal. So I think that's the first thing.
Yes. Can we just like say that again? Optimal, not normal. And like, that's a whole other conversation about how do we define that normal piece. Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted people to really hear that.
No, yeah, I think it's a really good point because so many women are told usually by their OBGYNs or reproductive endocrinologists that look at these hormones and say, "Oh, you're fine." And what does that mean? Or, "Oh, all your labs are normal." And they come to me and say, "Oh, my doctor said everything's normal and I still can't get pregnant. Can you help me?" And I'm like, normal doesn't mean anything to me because what Western medicine considers normal is not always optimal for you to get pregnant. And that might be one of the reasons why it's not working.
When these women come in the door, though, do you see some common trends in terms of women who have been labeled as normal, but we still can't conceive? Are you seeing some common trends in terms of lifestyle or endocrine conditions or other things that are going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think I would say probably one of the biggest trends is the number of women that have PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome under the surface is really, really high. So they go to their Western doctors. The doctor's like, "Oh, you're fine. Everything's normal." They come to us. We do some more testing. You can't diagnose polycystic ovarian syndrome just from those 4 hormones, but there's a few other hormones that we can test. And then I might say to the patient, like, you have relatively regular cycles, but that's not the only marker for PCOS. And you do have some of these underlying hormonal imbalances that are making it more challenging for you to conceive. And I try not to label people, but most of them have PCOS, right? So that's part of it. I think endometriosis is the other big one that is under the surface, but often missed or not diagnosed by doctors. Endometriosis is a different issue because really the only full diagnostic on that is to have a laparoscopic surgery, which is not always the most feasible thing to do. But I think for us, if we suspect that a woman has endometriosis, there are some local doctors that we refer to that do like less invasive processes to diagnose. And it's not as definitive, but it gives us a sense of, is this something we need to worry about? And then just approaching it from the more underlying pieces. So I feel like almost everyone has high levels of toxin exposure, which is like we just in our culture have so many toxins that are known to be related to fertility, which continue being used in whatever form. Women, for example, walk out of the house with over 100 chemicals put on her body, at least 75 of which are known reproductive harm. So we are constantly being exposed to things, even if they're on a low level. If you do something every day for 15 years, it's harming you in some way. So the exposure that we have to toxins is a common theme throughout everyone that we work with. Men alike, we haven't even touched on the men's
I know, issues. I was going to say, we should probably talk about the men.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, we could definitely get into men. So that's part of it. I think the other part is kind of the stressed out culture, which leads to like now I'm so stressed out, and now I need to unwind with a daily glass or sometimes a daily bottle of wine, which is a known known to cause reproductive harm. It's depleting the quality of the eggs. It's having so many impacts in the body that directly relate to fertility. So now, like, you kind of add all these underlying things together, and then you add on top a layer of, you might have endometriosis or PCOS, or you have some nutrient deficiencies or things like that. Guess what? It's like the body is like, do I really need to produce a baby? I'm just trying to survive right now. So when we kind of are in a more stressed out place, whether that stress be internal, external, things that we're putting into our bodies, all of those stressors combine to kind of shut down the reproductive system and deprioritize reproduction in an effort to just help our own selves survive. So
I'm listening to this, and it's funny because, I know we have people who are listening. They're like, oh, I mean, again, why a whole year? And you kind of encapsulated so much of it right there. I say to women, like, if we run values where we're looking at exposures and we can see these numbers, this isn't just us being like, everyone's toxic. You can actually quantify these numbers. The most powerful detox any woman can go through, in my clinical experience, is being pregnant. Like, the before and afters is outstanding. So it's not just, can you get pregnant, and does that work on your own personal timeline? If you don't take the time to prepare your body for all the reasons that you just mentioned, you're just handing all of that off to this poor little baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the average child has been tested at birth to have over 237 toxins floating around in his or her bloodstream at birth.
Yes. And this is something that we can't control all of it, there's so much of it that we actually can. Can you just paint a little bit of a picture of what we need to be mindful of with respect to the men in this whole process as well?
So, yes. So men are very interesting because the number of times that I have seen couples, we only work with couples. So unless you're a solo mom by choice, your partner needs to come see us. Mm-hmm. And we do something unique. Like, we don't charge for the guys because
cool.
We just make it like you're added in bonus. And if you're not making use of this bonus, that's on you. Yeah. But you absolutely need to just come in. So that's part of it. But I think that when the number of times I've heard couples share their fertility journey, and I'm like, okay, so what analysis did they do for the guy? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, where's the semen analysis? Right. And most of the time there is none. So there is still a sub it's like happening on a very subtle level under the surface, where even doctors are promoting this idea that it's just the woman's fault. And it's really not. 49% of infertility has to do with male factor infertility. So only the 51% is the woman, and 49% is still the men. So we absolutely need to be testing all of these guys. The second, and honestly, like, I feel like they should be getting tested right at the beginning of the fertility journey. So regardless of whether you know or you don't know that you're going to have fertility issues, it should just be something that is done as a check on the guys right from the beginning. Like, don't wait 6 to 12 months to get tested. The second is that for like all the factors related to sperm, so sperm count, sperm motility, and sperm morphology in the last 100, like if you compare 100 years ago to now, what we consider normal now is a tenth of what we considered normal 100 years ago. So just as an example, counts 100 years ago were considered normal if they were well over 100 million. Now counts are considered, sperm count is considered normal if it's 15 million or more. So we have changed.
We're lowering the standards for men.
Yes, basically, we why have we just lowered, oh, guys are having issues, so let's just lower the standard. That makes perfect sense to me. Sarcasm there.
Oh, I got it, sister. I'm bang on with you on that piece. And we're talking so much about the things that can go wrong, but the other piece that I want to give people the tools so that they can start to put their body in a place where things can go right. What are the most powerful lifestyle habits that we can put in place? And by put in place, I mean be disciplined around that move the needle on one's fertility. Because I have way too many friends say to me, talk to me about freezing my eggs. Talk to me about this. And I'm like, let's first talk about, and then what's your list?
So my foundations for fertility, this is anyone can take this and put it into their life and know that it's going to help support their bodies at the minimum on improving baselines, right? So the first is, are you drinking enough water? The number of men and women that are dehydrated and the impact that has on circulation and blood flow to your reproductive organs, that's pretty essential. And your hormones are facilitated by the right movement of fluids in your body. So if you don't drink water, you're probably not helping support your hormones or your reproductive organs. So that is the first and foremost thing. At the minimum, half your body weight in ounces. If you drink coffee, you need to weigh up your water intake. Every cup of coffee that you drink, you should add 4 cups of water to your baseline, because that's how dehydrating it is. The second is to eat good food, right? I'm sure everyone says this and repeats this over and over again, but when we're talking about fertility, it should really be that you're increasing your antioxidant intake. And most of the time, the foods that are deep, rich colors are high in antioxidants and nutrients. So green leafy vegetables, dark fruit, dark vegetables like broccoli, just get a variety of all the different colors. When you go shop in the grocery store or farmer's market, try to get a variety of different colors so that you know that you're getting a variety of different nutrients and antioxidants from the foods that you're eating. The second is, if you're not eating vegetables, I don't want to overwhelm people, but I think the goal, so you can move the needle forward, it's to have a variety of about 30 different plant foods in your diet over the course of a week. So that gives you kind of a nice baseline to make sure that you're getting a variety and not just focusing on, oh, I eat kale every single day. Well, kale is great, but it's probably not the only thing that you want to be eating. So
it's definitely not the only thing I want to be eating.
I love kale. I could eat it all day, but I know that I need to switch it up every now and then. And really I've been trying to do this for our family as well, is just increase the variety of foods that we eat, and really aiming for this, how can we incorporate 30 different plant foods into our diet every single week. And it's challenging. It's challenging for me. So I'm not saying that you have to get to 30, but as much variety as you can add, just know that you're helping your body get a broader spectrum of nutrients and antioxidants by doing that.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah, keep going. I know you're I've got more. Yeah.
And then avoiding GMO foods. So really like looking for foods that are labeled non-GMO, especially when it comes to corn, soy, wheat. Not that any of these foods are things that you should eat, but if you are consuming any of these foods, they should always be labeled non-GMO, because most of these foods are grown on farms next to farms that have GMOs. So even if it says organic, it doesn't necessarily mean it's non-GMO. It needs to have an extra non-GMO label for it to be non-GMO.
And just so people understand, when grains are genetically modified, they're not genetically modified so you get more nutrients. They're genetically modified so they don't die when they are given increased amounts of pesticides. So they're genetically modified to withstand higher levels of toxicity, in particular glyphosate. So I just want to be like extra clear here for people who are like, well, maybe I get more nutrients. You do not. You get more anti-nutrients and you get more direct toxins that impact your fertility. I get worked up about this. Okay, back to your list.
I think that's a really good point, because glyphosate in particular is one of the most toxic things that food is getting sprayed with. And not just food, cotton is a plant that is extremely sprayed with glyphosate. And let's think about what cotton is used for women. Like tampons, pads, almost always made out of cotton. You're putting them into or right near your reproductive organs. And the glyphosate is actually shown to reduce fertility significantly. So one of the biggest shifts that you can make is, as a woman, is to stop using these products. Or if you have to continue, like if you can't shift off of tampons, then at least make sure that they're organic, because cotton, again, is one of the most sprayed glyphosate plants that there is. So
you've inspired me to do an entire episode on tampon alternatives.
I think that would be a really fun episode.
I love these suggestions because they're so accessible for people, and especially things like the cotton, which I think a lot of people don't think about this.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the list.
Yes.
The other things that we can do, coffee. That's a question I get a lot. Can I continue drinking my coffee? So my rule of thumb on that is, if you need it, meaning you wake up in the morning and you cannot function without a cup of coffee, your body is reliant on coffee, you need to avoid it. I know it sounds like counterintuitive or whatever, but the people that are okay to drink coffee are probably the ones that don't need it when they wake up in the morning. They don't need it to function. It's kind of like, oh, I can have it once in a while and it feels good. And I like that it feels warm and fuzzy when I drink it. That's fine. But if you're like, oh my God, I'm dragging till I have my cup of coffee, that is showing adrenal depletion, and coffee is just making that adrenal depletion worse. So you need to detox off of coffee if that is you. And then I already kind of mentioned this, but the alcohol. I mean, alcohol is detrimental to fertility, and it's hard because, it's at least for me, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like I relate, life is stressful. You need to have a little something once in a while, but alcohol should not be that something that you go for.
Well, and that's just it. It's like, what choices can we make that are inclusive of balance? And what choices do we make that for any particular phase of life are not moving us towards our goal? And I think you hit the nail on the head that alcohol piece. I feel like we could do this all day long, exploring these ideas of health optimization related to fertility. But what I am going to do is I'm going to transition the interview. I want to move us into a place where we talk about our KPIs. So just like we have key performance indicators in our business, we have them in how we live our lives as well. And sometimes that's the best insight in terms of how to bring all of these pieces together. So if you'll indulge me, I've got a few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay, sure.
First one, what's the most impactful book you've read during the pandemic?
Oh, during the pandemic. That's interesting. So every year I read You Are a Badass. I love that book. I keep rereading it because I get nuggets every single time. So that would be my top book choice.
That's awesome, right? And when you're in a different emotional state, you see things differently. It's a good choice. What is the one thing you're most consistent with respect to your health?
I was anticipating this question and I was like, well, I do all the things like eat good food and get good sleep and drink lots of water and all the things. The one thing that I can share that like most people probably don't know about is there's a technique called cortices, which basically is a 2-minute hack to optimize your nervous system function. And I do this every single day. So you can, if you're like, hey, I want to do this too, just look up cortices, CORTICES, and Aumatma, which is my first name, and it'll pop up to a YouTube video that will show you how to do it.
That's the first place I'm going after this. What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
Oh, that's a good one. I think that's probably true. I have coached quite a lot of my fellow colleagues to uplevel their business. And it's just something that I like. Obviously, I don't do that as a profession, but it's something that I love. And I like to see people succeed. So
that's awesome. That is totally badass. What do you do for fun or play?
Roll around with my 2-year-old.
There we go. Full circle on the fertility story. I know it's it is endless. And last question for you, entrepreneurism. Are we born this way or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
I think that's a both and. I think that there is a general or a inclination that some of us have towards entrepreneurship, but I think if I had to pick one, it would definitely be trained. Like we have to develop our entrepreneurial skills. And, I don't know how many NDs or doctors you have listening to this, but we don't get this training in school. Like you guys, we have to go get it somewhere else. And we need to train ourselves to think like an entrepreneur and like continue to challenge and up-level ourselves so that we can have the biggest impact that we have in the world.
I love that. Dr. Aumatma Simmons, thank you so much for being here with me today. Where can we send people to learn more about all the things you are up to?
Thank you. People can go to www.holisticfertilitycenter.com. That's our website. And you can also hit me up on Instagram, holistic_fertility_doctor.
Fantastic. We'll put all of it in the show notes so everyone can have access. It was such a pleasure. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This week's episode was a specific subject matter for a specific type of woman at a particular place in her life. But tackling these conversations and giving you insight into these important elements of our own health and our own empowerment are really what we're all about over here at the Entrepology Podcast. If you want to carry on this discussion and meet other women who are equally passionate about their business, mindset, and health, I'm going to invite you to come and hang with us over in the Entrepology Collective in our free Facebook group. Here you're going to have an opportunity to extend the conversations that we start on the podcast and meet like-minded, mission-driven entrepreneurs and go-getters just like you. Next week on the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Leah Saunders. We're going to be talking all about sleep and the implications of our hormones in actually getting us to finally rest. You're not going to want to miss next week's episode. It will drop on Tuesday. We'll see you wherever podcasts are found.